In this demo, we're going to take a look at building on the previous demo where we looked at using the AAuth spec for agent identity, but now we're going to introduce authorizations. And so to run this demo, we're going to be using Keycloak, which I've implemented the AAuth spec in, as well as Agent Gateway, again, which I've implemented AAuth in. And the demo follows this flow where a user at a UI connects up to a backend. The backend application can call into these agents over the A2A protocol. And in the previous demo, like I said, we used AAuth to establish agent identity using message signing and verification with cryptographic keys. And in this demo, we're going to look at is the backend will call agent, the supply chain agent, but the supply chain agent it'll know who the backend is, but it'll issue a signed token that says, hey, you need to go get authorization to call me. So the supply chain agent will respond with a 401 and a token that says, the backend agent is trying to call supply chain agent. I trust this IDP to make the decision and issue tokens if it's allowed. And so now the backend, when it goes to get the tokens, it'll send along this resource token. The resource token will contain the scopes and the binding of cryptographic binding of this call. And then if it approves it, we'll return a token that backend can then use to call supply chain optimizer. So again, this is the AAuth spec from Dick Hart, who also implemented or authored AAuth and AAuth 2.1. And we'll be looking at the authorization flow, which looks like this. So again, the agent calls, the resource challenges by returning a resource token, and then the AI agent uses that to receive its access token. So let's go ahead and take a look at the demo here. If I call the backend, and the backend will call the supply chain agent, we'll let that proceed. And in this case, it worked. If we look at the call flows, the traces here, let's refresh this, and look at what actually happened, we have some errors, which we're expecting. So the supply chain backend calls so the backend calls the supply chain agent, and this actually will fail. We get a 401. But we see the agent identity has been established using the cryptographic mechanisms that we saw in the previous demo. And if we look at the actual headers, we see the signatures and the signing that takes place to establish identity. In the response from supply chain, we now see you need to identify yourself, but you need an authorization token. And to go get that authorization token, here is a resource token that you can use that identifies what exactly is required for authorization. And in this case, you can see that the audience will be Keycloak. The agent is the agent that called is the backend, and we're binding this to that agent. And this is the scope in this case that's required to call the supply chain agent. So now the back end, if we come further down, will call into Keycloak, and Keycloak will decide whether or not it approves and gives authorization for this. And if it does, then the back end can call supply chain again. This time we see that it calls with a valid token, and we can look at the headers in a second, but it calls with this authorization token, and this was issued by Keycloak with the scopes that were required by the resource. and this is issued for the supply chain agent, and it is bound and tied to the identity of the backend. So only the backend can use this token. It's not a bearer token. It's tied cryptographically to the backend. All right, and so then we can see that that proceeds. We sent it in the headers as part of the message signatures. So that is how we the AAuth spec is written to challenge for authorizations, to get those authorizations, and then to include those authorizations as part of the message signature. In the next video, we'll take a look at introducing the user and getting the user to consent to a specific action by an AI agent. Again, layered. So that's a common theme in the AAuth spec, is that you progressively can layer on top of various mechanisms like identity, authorization, introducing the user, and then cross-identity token exchange, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're interested, take a look at these guides that I've built. Take a look at the actual exploratory spec itself, and these are good patterns to establish and think about for agent identity. So be on the lookout for the next video.